I'm trying to build helmets that have augmented auditory technology that can sort of bring back some of what you're missing.
Ivermectin had some efficacy in treating dreaded COVID-19.
I get excited when I understand things because I'm generally fairly stupid at heart.
Cultural evolution over time created writing letters that actually look like nature.
And I've probably been in bars where 30 different barroom brawls have broken out.
Suddenly people are speaking like a bar fight. I suddenly get more serious. It means my body's prepared for quicker action.
Every time there's a driveway, every time there's a car next to me, every time I'm passing an area of woods that I think a deer could jump out, I'm alert.
When you put on a typical motorcycle helmet, stereotypical motorcycle helmet, you're cutting off your lower visual field. In fact, even face masks are cutting off your lower visual field.
I believe that that's a good way to cure depression. Is going out and hitting it on the road a therapy thing in your mind?
I'm not that kind of psychologist to really have any really strong...
Big breaking news. Within the last couple of weeks, we have launched a newsletter on the Slice app. It's a French app. We post trades that we're putting on, weekly newsletter. We look at markets, not just from a trader's perspective too, but from medium term and longer term portfolio construction. Bobby, why should people sign up for the Finance Unfiltered newsletter? Code.
Finance Unfiltered is what it is. It's on the Slice app. Rather than try and read out the Slice website, it's in the comments on all these videos, or it's in the description, or you can go to mine or Jimmy's X accounts, which you guys, of course, all follow. And it's in the link in my bio, and it's in Jim's pinned tweet. But it's literally double-digit pages. It starts out with Jimmy's take for the week. We call it Jim's 3 cents because he's too smart to offer us 2 cents.
No doubt.
And then we go down to Mike Arnold, who you've seen on this show over and over again, and his technical analysis of multiple major markets, both short, medium, and long-term. If you're a long-term investor, especially in equities or gold or Bitcoin, Mike's coverage of these things, especially the weekly charts, invaluable. Then we go all the way down to trades that we currently have on. One of the three of us has it on. We've described it in the previous newsletter, and we keep sort of a running commentary of those, and then new potential trade ideas. None of them are tagged as short, medium, or long-term. They're just all tagged as entry, stop, and target. And then if you see an extended target, you'll see updates in the actual Slice app, not just in the newsletter, where we say, hey, we're taking that target off, or we're moving the stop, keeping the trade on, turning it into investment, et cetera. And then it finishes with Jim's most important thing for the week. Jim also puts out his own individual futures trades that he's currently doing in the Slice app because we have intra-week updates. The newsletter is every week, once a week, comes out on Sunday morning, all ready for you guys to read it and be ready for Monday morning.
And it is, I benefit from it quite a bit because being able to share ideas with first Mike and Bobby, but you guys too, coming back into us and explaining things, making me explain it makes me a better trader. Thank you guys very much. Finance Unfiltered newsletter. Welcome to the Futures Edge. I am Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. We have a big get today, and I'm very, very excited about the show. We have Mark Changizi, who, if you haven't heard of him, which I'm sure most of you have, he's a neuroscientist. He's written a slew of books. The ones that I think that I'm going to mention are The Brain from 25,000 Feet, The Vision Revolution, 3.0, but the one that's his most recent and the most intriguing to me, which I read, was The Motorcycle Mind. Thank you for being on the show, Mark. We really appreciate it very much.
Oh, it's great to be here.
But tell us about yourself. Where are you coming to us from?
Yeah, well, I'm in Miami right now. And in terms of my background, I'm a physics, math undergrad. PhD was mathematics. But I sort of transitioned into cognitive science, neuroscience. So I became a theorist. So I kind of brought the math and physics tools to answer why we evolved to be the way we are, why we see illusions, why you have color vision. It's an empath sense. Why your fingers get pruning when wet. They're actually rain treads. How we came to have language and music, how they culturally evolved to fit us. And my last book before Motorcycle Mind was answering Darwin's 150-year-old question about what are emotional expressions for, and sort of deriving from first principles how they work as a poker system, where we're betting when we emotionally express. That allows us to come to compromises and carry out negotiations. So a lot of it's sort of wispy questions like color and illusions and art. One of my books is on the origin of art with Steven Pinker and others, sort of a joint book. These are really wispy stuff, but kind of having the math background, which was always my aim as a kid, as a Carl II kid, to have this really rigorous mathy background, physics background, so that I could go answer the questions to the universe, as I called it as a kid. Yeah.
So what's funny is that we had Ed Dowd on our show. You remember, Ed Dowd, right? Wrote
Yep.
a really, really interesting book about the pandemic and about the weird different ways people went. And I remember some people said to us, he's a finance guy, stay in your lane. And to that, I say, go F yourself. Because the reality of it is that finance, math, physics attracted for decades some of the brightest minds and some of the best data researchers. For them to go out of their lane is what we really want. Those are the people that can actually get down to the real solutions to it. You agree with that, right?
Well, no, but we learned during COVID that it's the experts that we should trust. Don't you remember?
The ones that were wrong in literally everything. Not only were they wrong like 6 months later, they were wrong like even within their own sentences finish each other. Like they'd contradict each other and all, like, because I always say this is the 5-year anniversary of us realizing didn't really fit the definition of a pandemic, being that it was estimated to be 500 times more lethal in March of 2020 than we knew by the end of April 2020. So we just decided to go with the mitigation strategy anyway. Can you talk to that for a sec?
Yeah, I mean, that's in some sense, it's through COVID that I became, I was sort of well known as a scientist. I had several TED Talks. I was sort of the talking head on a TV show, on Head Games, on Discovery Channel, and things like this. Not very well known, but I became more politically known when I realized in early March of 2020 that the whole cadre of sort of libertarian types like me, classical liberals, they just fell for COVID completely. They were just saying, you got to mask up, you got to lock down. All of the supposed intellectuals that valued civil liberties supposedly in cost benefit analyses fell. And so I said, I guess I have to stand up. And as a scientist, there's a lot of pushback on becoming political. We've got the things that I want to be remembered for on my tombstone when I die are all these sorts of discoveries that I've made. And I don't necessarily want it to get tainted with, but he was a dick about politics, something like that. So we kind of push back, not to mention I'm more on the right, libertarian right. And from the academic world's point of view, I'm utterly evil, right? So you often don't want to advertise this for willy-nilly. And I said, look, everybody that was supposedly standing up for freedom completely broke. They didn't have principles that held fast exactly when it mattered. It doesn't matter to hold on to freedom when there's no one threatening to take it away. It matters only when there's a perceived emergency. And so that's when I stood up and I became really well known as a freedom fighter of all things. And so I still go to coffee shops. People recognize me because of my role during COVID. Yeah.
It's interesting. We attract a lot of people who are like hated by, I guess that's kind of our wheelhouse. When we get out of finance, we end up bringing in people like, carnivore doctors. And we had Dr. Robert Malone on. We had Vivek Ramaswamy on. We get all these people that are sort of hated in their lane. I shouldn't say hated, but I wanted to ask you about data specifically. What constitutes good data? And how do you feel about people who believe they can read data, reading it? And let me give you some background on that last question there. During COVID, I remember talking to relatives of mine, both sort of in distant medical fields, not medical doctors. One was a cancer nurse a long time ago. The other one was a dental surgeon. And as I was explaining to them things that I saw in the data about the vaccines, they right away asked me, fallacious appeal to authority. Where'd you get your medical degree? And I said, I don't have a medical degree, but I can fucking read data. I read data all day long in my job. I look at numbers and try to figure out pathways of markets all day long. So number one, what makes good data to you? And number two, when do you look at somebody and say, yeah, you don't understand the data at all? Where does that kind of fit in?
Well, the first and obvious response is that doctors are terrible scientists. Doctors are terrible at analyzing data. At best, you have the MD PhDs, which do almost always they do a rushed 3-year PhD, which the advisor kind of pitying them because of all the shit they have to go through. It's such a long, they give them something that they know is going to work in 3 years so that they're not spending 6 years as a PhD in addition to their 4 years plus 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years of residency. So they have and that's 0.5% of doctors. They're terrible scientists, and then they and even worse is that they have a confidence, a lack of humility that's off the charts, right? Because they play God every day. So these folks you can't trust. They're really this day and age just trained to do what they've been told, follow certain guidelines, and recommend certain CYA procedures to make sure that no one can come back and sue them. And that often just optimizes their payoff. They just do not appear to think, and which you've experienced both in your regular life almost surely, and we saw hitting the fan during COVID. So I think in terms of reading data, I think that they are off the charts poor at it. As for what generally makes good data, I mean, that's sort of a long, deep kind of question. As a theorist, I'm a theorist, but I'm not a theorist in the physics sense where I can't go out and get data. As a cognitive scientist, it's part of our culture to bring new data into the papers. You can't just publish a theory paper in Physical Review E or whatever, like sometimes physics theorists can do, where they're acting like mathematicians. You won't be read. You won't have your ideas stick. So in all of my 30 years now of work as a scientist, which grand unifying theory of illusions or whatever it might be, having to come up with ways to get new kinds of data, either by pulling data from across the last 100 years of literature, or going out and getting experimental data. But, I can't do the kinds of experiments that some of these people devote their lives to. Getting good data is hard, but what makes good data is a difficult question to answer in a short quip.
So can I have a follow up on this too? Because you mentioned a couple different things about kind of the way people think and about particularly the period of insanity, which I like to call 2020 to 2024. And I could pick one of 20 different things that popped into my head to question you about. But one thing that stands out right now is when there became a little bit of a rumbling that ivermectin had some efficacy in treating dreaded COVID-19. All of a sudden, within days, it became such a coordinated, and again, I read Persuasion. I understand a little bit about what they're trying to do, but how can they control so many of the people to start screaming horse dewormer 2 days after it was put on? It was after we rumbled about it. It was just the craziest thing ever, how quickly it rippled through the idiots.
Yeah. Well, look, these things aren't top-down directed. This is one of the main themes that I've been trying to get folks to understand is making sense of mass hysteria. And as a physics math kind of guy, biology guy, our whole world is understanding emergent phenomena, how without a designer, you end up with a deep coordination, a deep design, all of this kind of design that you can't explain by virtue of a designer. And during mass hysterias, we end up with massive coordination across the earth that even the DMV, when it is top-down control, like it's usually crap. It's just crap ability to do it. But you find much greater seeming design when you have a mass hysteria, and when it's selecting for certain kinds of behavior. So in the case of ivermectin, I had a video that I did for the Science Moments series concerning cooties. We all have instincts of disgust, of cootie disgust. And those that aren't born in America, cooties just mean sort of gross, icky, infectious kind of gooky stuff. And if food lands on the floor, it's immediately got cooties. We joke that you got a 5-second rule, but it's funny because of course, no, it already has cooties. And so we had this notion of what an infectious thing is, what we refer to as cooties, and we applied it to COVID. Now, the problem is that COVID was an aerosol. It has none of the properties of the kinds of things that, in fact, the cooties physics is completely different. But suddenly we gave it cooties physics, which didn't apply. So, for example, cooties physics, masks make sense because it's like little gooky stuff that would be blocked by a mask. But of course, aerosols are not. 2-meter rule, roughly sensible, because if you cough out cooties, it's not going to land directly in your eye. It's going to land on your feet. Not a big deal. And there was a whole lot of, and one of the things about cooties is that it can lead to sort of debilitating disease if you that's the intuition. You might really be sick for a long time and it may affect you for life. Now, so the whole idea of COVID is it had this really bad cooties-like qualities. It was disproportionately dangerous, altogether novel. And if someone came along, just for the specific case of the horse dewormer of ivermectin, someone came along and said that some off-the-shelf generic drug can fix it, this completely goes against the narrative that the socio-political COVID I'm better than you community had evolved, which is disproportionately dangerous, altogether novel. The only way is to overturn society, and they truly believed all this stuff. If ivermectin could have worked, and I had no idea whether it worked, all I said is let's let doctors freaking decide that it's an off-the-shelf harmless drug. Otherwise, if it had worked, it would completely undermine the entire piles of justifications for their entire worldview that had sort of evolved over March and April. So it had to be fought. It had to be poo-pooed and made fun of. And again, there's no decision making. It's like, okay, we've got to make fun. Okay, get the troops out, send them out to no. But anybody who managed to create an argument or a meme that made fun of the enemy would be rewarded with all the social capital from those that are inside the COVID community. And suddenly more people follow them, more people give them reputation, they rise, more people want to be like them. Their idea spreads across really well, and then it works for them and in terms of making ivermectin less able to get. So these are the kinds of really complex emergent evolutionary, but cultural evolutionary phenomena that drove these kinds of physics that we saw, these kinds of mass hysterias. And they happen all the time, but they're not necessarily ill like what we saw during COVID.
So I've got a million things I want to ask you, unfortunately, because one of the things I think that I picked up from reading The Motorcycle Mind, by the way, just looking at us, which one of us do you think rides motorcycles between me or Joey?
Well,
Don't say it.
Answer me. I haven't. Right now, I'm only seeing Jim.
Okay, good.
Maybe I should press a different button to make me.
No, it's better that way. You don't want to see Bobby. He's ugly as shit.
I'm holding up your book right now since you can't see me. And one of the things I liked in here is I've ridden motorcycles since I was 19. And one of the things when you explained countersteer, I'd heard that mentioned before. And in the book, you talked about turning right to turn left, basically, right? That you have to actually sort of make a small motion of you're going to turn right in order to turn left. And I'd heard that a million times. And you use this description of these imaginary pads on the handlebars of the motorcycle. If you push these sensitive pads, you're able to turn the way you want to turn in. And I'm sorry, I thought that was brilliant. I actually turned to my wife when I was reading it and I said, I have just finally figured out why people say you turn left to turn right on a motorcycle. Because you actually do this sort of weird little pressure to make the bike lean that is the opposite of the way you think you should turn. And it actually explained to me very clearly, you guys, if you ride motorcycles, you got to read this book. It explained to me very clearly why getting up to speed on a motorcycle seems obnoxious to everybody else, but is actually necessary to actually ride safely. Like when you're pulling out of your driveway, when I'm pulling out of my driveway on my bike, I immediately gun it and try to straighten the bike out as quick as I can because you're just able to manage your movements and control. Well, I don't want to say control the bike to you because the way you made it sound, and I think it's very real. You never realize that you're not coming out of the seat when you're riding a motorcycle like you are when you're turning in a car. Jimmy, because you don't know this feeling, turn left in a car, your body kind of moves to the right. Turn left on a motorcycle, your body doesn't move. You're stuck in that seat. Another thing you explained really, really well, I was riding my bicycle and I was listening to your chat with Jordan Peterson. You were talking about color vision, being able to tell different things in skin tones. And you talked about squeezing your hand and seeing blue and squeezing your hand and seeing red. And I was in the middle of an exercise and I squeezed my hand, the whole hand was red. And I just got all excited. I get excited when I understand things because I'm generally fairly stupid at heart. So where do you get these sort of ideas to put things together like that? Obviously, you've spent a lot of time thinking about why you like riding a motorcycle. To me, it was always just like, I like it. It clears my head and makes me think more clearly if I need to think about something. How do you get to the point where you're thinking about, okay, why do I like the motorcycle so much?
Well, I mean, obviously, the motorcycle book is a little different than my other books. My other books are, answering questions that scientists have struggled with for sometimes 100 years or longer. And so, it's a discovery in the normal sense, the claim discovery, claim grand unifying theory. Whereas it's not as if there's been some field of scientists wondering what exactly explains the science between why people like to ride, right? It's not a standard question, but it's still, in my opinion, it really is I try to motivate in there. It really amounts to a great question. And only motorcyclists really feel it about why it is an important thing, because it's an utterly fundamental and different kind of experience than anything else that we've had. So I try to unpack throughout the whole book why that is, but it comes on the backdrop of 30 years of research on explaining experiential stuff, why it is that we are designed the way we are evolutionarily. How does it match up to our evolutionary history such that, like, for example, one of my discoveries concerns how we came to read and write. Now, we have brains that are not plastic. A lot of people say, oh, humans were so plastic compared to the other animals. No, we're just as rigid as every other animal. We're just an animal. We happen to be a little bit bigger brained than the other great apes, but we're just quantitatively bigger. But so reading is not something we evolved to do. It's much too recent. Most of us have great grandparents that were illiterate even. Only reason we can read is because cultural evolution over time created writing letters that actually look like nature. The kinds of combinations of just objects in the world, when they're opaque and you've got objects behind other objects, you end up with things like L junctions, just contours that intersect at a point. Or you end up with T junctions. And again, it doesn't look like it on my actual fingers. It's actually just a thin contour when something goes behind something else. And you can work out the space of all 36 topologically distinct ones if there are 3 contours. And then you can ask, how commonly do these happen in nature, and how rare? Some of them are really rare, some are really common. And once you know which ones are really common and how common they are, then you can ask, do writing systems across humankind tend to look like the ones in nature? And do they come in similar frequencies? And it turns out that they do. Writing has culturally evolved to look like nature, thereby harnessing half of our brain, which is for recognizing objects, but it harnesses it and turns it into a reading system, even though it wasn't designed for that. So these are the kinds of ways in which culture and the artifacts around us have evolved over time with no designer to shape themselves to fit our instincts that are basically unchanging. So that's a lot of the stuff I do, is understanding why we see illusions. Illusions are actually your brain trying to anticipate the next moment so that it overcomes neural delays. All of these things where you see 2 vertical lines and there's all these radial lines going around, and you perceive the vertical lines to bow outwards. These are because in the next moment, all those optic flows tells your brain, I am moving forward, because in real life, all the time when you move forward, you get all this blur on your retina and says, oh, in the next moment, I'm moving down to the middle, and the sides of the doorway or whatever those 2 vertical lines are will flow outwards in my visual field, and things flow out more at eye level than above and below. It's everything that I've been doing for 30 years is about understanding the kinds of why we evolved, the kinds of instincts that we did for the natural world, or in some cases, how culture has evolved to tap into those instincts for other stuff and harness them for new kinds of stuff. So about a year ago, actually, I just sat down and in that context of 30 years of thinking about this in all these different domains, I was just thinking about my last 4 years of writing. I've only been writing since I was around 50. I'm 56 next week. And I just started writing these sort of really counterintuitive, surprising things about motorcycle and the experience of it, and sort of a short explanation given evolution and all the kinds of sort of a story about it. And I said, holy crap, in about 20 minutes, I had written 25 really surprising, interesting things from my point of view. And I said, I think there's a book in me. And so 4 or 5 months later, the book was done. It kind of just flowed out, figuring out which ones are going to be the dominant chapter, and how exactly to break it all up is the hard part. But it was on the backdrop of 30 years of thinking about these sorts of UX in some sense, or evolutionary UX sorts of thinking.
It's a weird thing because for me, I'm not really generally known as a thrill seeker. I don't want to skydive. I don't want to mountain climb. I went hang gliding once. Didn't really like it, but motorcycles are different. And I was trying to explain to somebody one day, and I said, it's not really, yes, I like going fast, but most of the time, if I'm at a stoplight, I accelerate quickly to make sure there's no cars around me. It's not because I want to show the cars how fast I am at 0 to 60. It's because I want to be on a road where there's no car right next to me. I enjoy riding in the city. I had a motorcycle in Chicago. I live in Southwest Florida right now. I enjoyed riding in the city more than here. Because here it's much easier to lull yourself into almost a bit of I don't want to say a sightseeing journey, but, enjoying the ride rather than looking around. In Chicago, my head was on a swivel. There's always a taxi cab. There's always a stop sign. There's always a pedestrian. And still, it was not a stressful experience. So for me, it was trying to explain to people why I liked riding a motorcycle was difficult because it wasn't about the thrill. Your book cleared a lot of this up for me. And that's why I think people who do ride, and when somebody asks you, why do you like riding so much? You don't know this about me, Jim does. I actually don't have full use of my right hand because of a motorcycle crash when I was 21, and I still ride. Like I literally prop my hand on the throttle, prop 2 fingers on the brake, and I just use my palm, almost like a martial arts palm strike, to hit the throttle. And I keep 2 fingers on the brake at all times. And that's how I ride. It's like something that you can't get out of you. So having said all that, it's not a thrill-seeking component, right? I mean, that's not the part, maybe with sport bikes.
Well, I certainly haven't had a chance to ride a sport bike. It's something I've been meaning to do. I don't know if I want one for my life, but I'd love to have a couple shots at it. But it certainly there's a thrill to. I live in Miami, and I just lane split all the way across town just a minute ago to get here. And it is thrilling. When you're lane splitting, you're not necessarily going that fast, 20, 25 occasionally. What makes the thrill of speed thrilling is the amount of optic flow things going by. So I used an example in the book of the Death Star when Luke Skywalker's diving in with his mates and going in that little canyon to go hit that one spot with the torpedoes or whatever it is. He's probably going a lot slower than he was when he was out in the middle of space, in the middle of nowhere, because you got to be moving more slowly there. But when you're out in the middle of space, there's no optic flow. So no matter how fast you're going, it's super boring. It's like actually becoming a pilot and driving, riding a Cessna, which is going to be super boring. You're not going around in caverns like they do in certain, movies with, like whatever that old movie was with the, like a CIA agent or whatever. It's super boring, in fact. But when you're on a bike, you can have those sorts of experiences. And so once you go into the canyon, suddenly you have all this optic flow really close, but you can have it at relatively slow speed. So when you're lane splitting through, you're just going a relatively slow speed, but you have all of the optic flow cues, which is what perceived speed is all about. Right now, we're all hurtling through space at 1 trillion miles per hour, but of course it feels like nothing. It's irrelevant. The only thing that matters are the cues to speed and your perception of it. And so you can get a lot of those cues and dose it towards yourself, depending upon where you choose to ride. So if I'm in the middle of a 5-lane highway and no one's on it, and I'm going, 80 miles per hour, there's a lot of wind cues. I talk about a variety of cues that are besides optic flow cues, but still it's fairly tame in the experience compared to relatively much, much, much slower, but high optic flow lane splitting cues. So a lot of that thrill, I think you are getting and you are enjoying it. And some of it's the fact that it's not only thrilling, but it's also a little dangerous. And if you could make it completely safe, 100% full experience, but 100% safe with zero risks, not sure that it would be the same. I think we would be feeling like we're just flying a drone in Langley or whatever, and over Iraq or something, and there's just no danger whatsoever. I think some of it is that you really can get hurt really bad because it's real things you're whizzing by. And so these are some of the things I talk about.
That's interesting that you got to that, because I was going to, the first part of my question was going to be, does there have to be a real danger? And you answered that part. But the second part of my question was this, and I'm not, Bobby and I sometimes talk about our youth, and there was a lot. I grew up in a very kind of rough area. I worked at bars, I worked places, and I've probably been in bars where 30 different like barroom brawls have broken out. And in those moments, particularly when you're at the center of it, because one of your friends said something stupid, there's a focus that happens. And it's like afterwards, you tell stories about it because of how thrilling it was, because there is a danger, because someone's could crown you with a bottle, et cetera. It's the same sort of thing. It's like rewires something in your brain when you're at that level where danger is a possibility. It's almost like, a psilocybin trip where you are getting to know yourself better. Is that a good way to describe it, you think?
Yeah, I think something like that, that would be a good way to describe it. But I was going to say, you're in control in a way that you probably are a little bit out of control and not sure what's going to happen.
When the bar erupts. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. And of course, sometimes we are out of control. Cars they're constantly trying to kill us. They're not occasionally they're purposely trying to kill us, but mostly they're just accidentally, unintentionally trying to kill us. So there's a lot out of our control as well. I did want to go back to just, one of the things that we touched on was that you become one with the bike, or we were pushing in that direction. Yeah. And this gets back to this countersteering that non-motorcycle riders don't understand, is that when you're in a car, you physically turn the steering wheel in order to turn the car. Now, as a rule in life, if you have to use your body to move something, that thing that you're moving ain't you. Now, let me give you an example. Suppose that you were a paraplegic. You lost use of your legs entirely. Well, those folks, unfortunately, they may have to actually just physically use their arms to lift their legs. Their legs are really no longer theirs. In fact, sometimes when I work out, do so much ab work, it hurts so bad that I choose to lift my leg for the next couple of days. So in that sense, it's no longer me. Turning a faucet, whatever it might do in life, that thing is not you if you find that you're having to move your body to move the other thing. Now, moving a steering wheel, moving a car, you do by moving with your hands a steering wheel. On a motorcycle, you might think, well, what's the difference? It's just I turn the wheel, and we're saying, no, it's countersteering. You actually countersteer, you go the opposite way. But it's not, that's the way you first tell people, but it's not what's going on at all. It's more like having your hands on the side of a horse or the rein. When you pull the rein, you don't have to pull. You just slightly tug it. It's just like putting your finger, if you know, it's just easier to have the rein, but you just reach up there, just slightly touch it. Let the horse know you want to go right, it's going to go right. Same thing on a bike. I would just either just push onto my right hand on the handlebar, or pull with my left, doesn't matter. But it doesn't move. It's as if there's a pressure-sensitive device in place there, such that as soon as I put a slight bit of pressure, the bike just leans over like it's nothing. It's a 600-pound bike, and it just leaned over, and it stays leaned over at an angle so long as I'm slightly pressing it with grandma-level strength. So this is the signature of it being your body. You haven't had to move your body to make it move. You've just put pressure, just like your internal muscle does, to, let's say, pull up my leg. When I actually, not, all of us can lift up their leg. That's because your muscle, well, there's no external behavior, just lifts with its tendons, the bone that lifts your leg up. Same thing. You are able to move. You become one with the bike. There's no rotating. You're not moving. You're literally just intuiting, turn, go right, lean right. And it just happens through the senses, the sensors, but with there no actual turning at all. So that's one of maybe half a dozen senses in which you become one with a motorcycle that doesn't hold up, let's say, for a car. It's not the same.
So tell me this. So you mentioned horses, which I love that you did, because then we can go into, there's so much use of therapy horses, and that's part of it for kids, particularly with behavioral thing. And to be part of the horse, I know some people who have done that with their children. Do you think there's a mental therapy aspect to being one with the bike? And is there any have there been any studies? Can people cure manic depression, cure things like that by, and again, I go to the weight room like you guys do too. And I believe that that's a good way to cure depression. Is going out and hitting it on the road a therapy thing in your mind?
Yeah, I'm not that kind of psychologist to really have any real strong, educated opinions in terms of referring.
Well, we have opinions on everything, and we don't know shit. So you're on the Future's Edge. You can just say things.
But it's a transformative experience, and I feel like it's made me want to live to be a strong person worthy of the power of that motorcycle, because the motorcycle gives you a kind of strength when you get on it. We have a lot of mythology across cultures about becoming a wolf. It's not really a wolf. It can become a horse. But you're really becoming a quadruped, a mammalian quadruped with 4 legs, 2 in the front, and you get a completely different kind of physics that we all fantasize. Some people dream about the idea of moving like a dog. Think about any old dog can practically run down a motorcycle. Right? There's just a regular old dog who can just shoot down the road at 40 miles per hour, and they end up with incredible different kind of physics that we have no experience with as bipeds. And so you're transforming into what's effectively a quadruped, like a wolf. And the sense in which is, the front legs of a wolf are like a wheel, because they're basically just mimicking a wheel. They're landing almost in the same spot in front of it, and they're just mimicking what one wheel does, and same for the hind legs. And so it's effectively a 2-wheel device, a quadruped. So when you're on a motorcycle, it's mimicking the kinds of physics that you have as a wolf. And it lets you transform into wolves. What's that movie with altered states? He's floating in this, for young people may not have seen it, I'm not sure it translates very well, but the idea is you're floating in these chambers which are getting rid of all of your stimuli, and then when it opens up, you're like an early human or something like this. So he's probably going around moving like a quadruped. And of course, there's the whole werewolf myths, and there's lots of mythologies where you're half horse, half man. There's lots of mythologies and fantasies amongst humans about being able to have that power of being able to move like a quadruped. And that's exactly what you have when you're on a motorcycle. And again, it's you becoming the motorcycle rather than in a car where you're controlling what turns out to be a really boring kind of animal. It's more like an animal, like a lizard, it's more equivalent when you start thinking through the physics of a 4-legged lizard with ventrally projected arms rather than dorsally like a wolf. And so you're just getting to ride a lizard rather than becoming a wolf.
It's interesting because I was listening to a video you did about why you ride without a helmet. And because my family has been on me for years that I need to wear a helmet. And I'm like, I might as well get rid of the bike, to be honest. I just don't. It's part of the reason that I didn't want one when I lived in California, because they had a helmet law. And I said, I don't really want to ride with a helmet. I'd rather not ride. And I heard your explanation of why it's better to ride without a helmet. And my initial, all due respect, answer when I heard that was, he's full of shit. This is not why. He just wants to look cool. And I've listened to it. And I go, I think he's full of shit on this one. And my wife's like, why? She said, because it's talking about a reason why you ride without a helmet. And my wife goes, well, I know you just want to look cool. I'm like, no, it's not actually that. I'd rather not ride. Can you explain the sort of physics of it the way you described it in that video?
Yeah, so I certainly occasionally, if I'm on the highway for long periods of time,
Sure.
if I'm going an hour north on the highway, 70 miles per hour, it's a little difficult.
And the wind, though, right?
The wind is overwhelming,
yeah.
and so at some point, at certain speeds, it becomes worse. For the argument that I'm going to make, the same arguments that I'm pointing out in terms of optimal perception, it reduces at sufficient speed. So you really need a helmet in those situations. But for a typical city driving, where you are engaged in very complex maneuvers with random vehicles doing all kinds of shit constantly, you need your full senses. So I've been consulting with Yamaha for almost 10 years on trying to build helmets that have augmented auditory technology that can sort of bring back some of what you're missing. Because when you put on a typical motorcycle helmet, stereotypical motorcycle helmet, you're cutting off your lower visual field. In fact, even face masks were cutting off your lower visual field. There's a lot of enhanced falls once people wore face masks, because people don't realize. So for example, football players, why do they put black on their cheeks? They put black on their cheeks because the sun is hitting their cheeks and it's reflecting into their eyes, which means they're seeing their cheeks. They're not consciously seeing their cheeks because it's in the far, far lower periphery. And it's there not just to see your own face, which is, I think, important for getting feedback for your emotional expressiveness to others, but it's also seeing the ground, because that optic flow at the ground is what helps you coordinate your behavior. You need to see that optic flow. The flow itself is what's guiding you as to how close or far things are in terms of its relative speed with one another. You need all that information, and you need your peripheral, side-to-side peripheral as well. That's the helmets that motorcyclists wear cut all of that off, and none of us are consciously aware of what it's subtracting. They go, well, I feel like I see everything. Well, yeah, everything that you consciously recognize as an object is still there, but there's all of this stuff that's all about your dorsal stream, it's called. The other half of your visual cortex, which is not about object recognition, it's about movement and locomotive and visual motor behavior. It's cutting all that off. You're missing a lot. What you really want is just to minimize how many accidents and the severity of the accidents. And so as you cut more and more of your visual field down, you can imagine eventually it's one of those old-fashioned helmets that you go diving in, right, from like in cartoons or whatever. And of course, everybody's going to nod their, oh yeah, so that point has got to be worse, right? But a lot of people don't get this point that eventually too much helmet is bad for your ability to be safe. It actually makes you less safe. So in the kinds of conditions where, especially where I'm in, with lots of just, you have to be active constantly and you're maneuvering around, you need to have your full array of senses to avoid injury. Nature made the same argument. All animals, except for humans, because we're bipedal, and occasional birds when they're walking, all animals lead with their head, right? Heads were out in front, and so since it's out in front, they had to put all their sensors there. They need to put the head is just the place where you put all of your sensory equipment. And once you have your sensory equipment there, the best place to put a brain safely to do all the computations with that sensory equipment would be maybe in the chest, someplace far away from the head, because that would be a nice helmet all around this rib cage or something to keep it safe. Where you wouldn't want to put it is out in the leading edge of the animal. Have these birds and these animals that are shooting, really fast. You wouldn't want to put the brain right there at the leading tip of these fast animals, would you? Well, yes, that's in fact where they put them. That's where evolution has put it. Why? Because if you bring it all the way down to the chest, well, now you've got 90% of your sensory apparatus is up front. So you have to have all of these wires, massive piles of circuitry getting there, which is just a lot of mass that you have to add. And two, it's a lot slower. Now you're going to have, instead of, let's say, 100 millisecond delays to build a perception, you're going to have to add another 200 or 300 milliseconds of time just to get there, and then another 300 milliseconds of time to get back to do the activities that you want. Evolution's answer to this trade-off is say, I'd rather have my brain in a precarious position so that if we did get into an accident, it's worse for my brain. But the payoff is that I have much quicker reflexes, much better perception around me, and so that I'm living one with the world so that I can avoid accidents altogether. I have a much lower incidence of accidents in the first place. That's the same kind of calculations that we have to make when we put helmets on. It's making us less athletic and quickly responsive creatures. But it's a trade-off. At some point, there's some cases where you're in the middle of the road where there's nothing else to do and there's so much wind. You're definitely probably getting better perception by putting a helmet on because the wind is just so bad that you can't, you can barely see and so forth. Yeah.
So I a question. So it's a two-part question, but it'll be quick. Is there been any sort of safety improvements on motorcycles over the decades? And two, have you ever tried riding like a Spider, Can-Am Spider, or a three-wheel in the back, or a two-wheel in the back thing? That's basically the same as just riding a convertible car. You get none of what you're talking about in those three-wheel bikes, right?
Yeah, so the latter question, yeah, it's effectively ruins the entire point of being on a
That's
motorcycle.
what I thought. So what about the first part? Are there any safety improvements that have been made, balance issues in bikes, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are anti-lock brakes that I'm not sure how long they've been there, but a lot of bikes now have anti-lock brakes. And I'm not the gearhead kind of guy, but there's probably a sequence of stories that help. I think at the end of the day, they're probably relatively minimal compared to the risks of riding compared to that of a car. I'm not sure that it makes a huge qualitative difference.
Yeah, I understand that, Bobby.
Yeah, I got to say something about that because I think there's always the safety issue seems to be what everybody right away brings up. Motorcycles.
Yeah, me for sure.
But I honestly look at them very similar to pistols, where the motorcycle itself, and this is in the book, but this is me talking, it doesn't want to fall down. It doesn't. And when you're riding, especially in a more crowded area, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I am much more cautious on a motorcycle than I am in a car. I've hit pedestrians.
But you know what I'm going to say about that, right?
What?
It's not you and your riding ability or you, Mark, and your riding ability. It's idiots driving cars who could make a mistake that's fatal for you.
That's what
and I guess that's part of it because we're living on the edge here a little bit. Go on.
Here's my retort to that. And then Mark, if you have anything too, my retort to that is on a motorcycle, every time there's a frontage road, every time there's a driveway, every time there's a car next to me, every time I'm passing an area of woods that I think a deer could jump out of, I'm alert. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to get into an accident. If I hit a deer with my motorcycle, the deer will be fine and I'm probably not going to make it. But I mean, I'll be looking at a YouTube video in my car and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I'm swerving all over the place. Never happens on a motorcycle. You just never, me anyway. I don't pull wheelies. I ride cruisers. I don't ride sport bikes. To your point, Mark, I traded with my buddies Ninja one time. We traded at the time I had a Suzuki Intruder and we traded for a day. And I came back and I said, take this thing because I do not want to drive slow on this. And I like driving slow. So now I have a Harley Street Bob. I ride it. I rarely exceed the speed limit. I'm always looking around. If I get hit, will I not make it? Probably. But I'm telling you, I've gotten in many more near misses in my car than I have on my motorcycle. And I've got hit more on my bicycle than I have on my motorcycle. Just my own personal experience, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, when you're on a motorcycle, unlike even being on a motor scooter, you are fully engaged, not just because you should damned well be, but because you've got your left hand needs to be there for the clutch, your right hand needs to be there for the front brake, which is sort of the crucial brake, and the throttle, and your left foot needs to be there for the gear shifter, and the right foot is the only thing that's sort of semi-optional. It's not quite as dear, but you really are tied in. And it forces you to be one with the bike. You really can't just, I mean, you see videos of the guy with a cigar, somehow managing to get a cigar while this is not easy. This is sort of a TV thing. In one time in real life, it's not an easy thing to do. But on a motor scooter, they're reading their phone while they're going to, deliver their Uber Eats or whatever. Both feet are dragging in the ground. One hand is on it and they're not even looking at the road. It lets you disengage. Same for cars. It lets you disengage and reach around, yell at the kids or whatever it is that you're doing. You can be totally disengaged. You can't even be disengaged on a motorcycle. It's very hard to be disengaged. It kind of forces you to become one with it. And you don't feel caged by that. You kind of like it because you are a wolf when you're riding it. That's just you. You don't even want to disengage. But I want to push back on a lot of people's intuitions. People will show these like it's 39 times more dangerous, more mortality rate per 100,000 miles or whatever is, let's say, 39 times more dangerous on a motorcycle than a car. So there's a two-pronged kind of answer to this. Because if you look, when you're looking at, and I did a Science Moment video in my YouTube series on this, when you look at those things, they'll show these bar graphs and they'll have this really long risk for motorcycle. And then right below it's this really small little risk for cars. And then that'll have buses and subway or whatever, these tiny little dots that barely stick out. Now, that's not a fair way to do it because these are factors of one another. So it turns out that if you look at cars versus, let's say, the bus, there's another factor of like 60. It's 60 times safer to take the bus than drive a car. Now, of course, you can't see it because they need to take the log of these graphs and show it on the log. And if you do the logarithm, then it just looks like there's bikes, and then it gets a little bit less dangerous for cars, and a little bit less. It all becomes bar graphs that you can actually see rather than little dots on the side. So you might ask me, well, hey, it's 60 times more dangerous that you're driving your car. Why aren't you taking the bus? How dare you? Like often a wife-husband conversation. How dare you risk our lives together by driving your car? Well, no one's going to say that. No one wants to get on the freaking bus. But it's 60 times safer, and it's only 39 times more dangerous on a motorcycle. And actually, so the second part of this is then I'll say the third part. Second part is that there's positive utility in things, right? We enjoy. Not just it's useful in life to go get the groceries on my schedule, not the bus's schedule. And on a motorcycle, there's also utility. I get from Coconut Grove, which is on the south end of Miami, to where I live on the north of Miami Design District. I get there in 16 minutes, no matter the time of day, no matter how much traffic is. A car, it could take them an hour and 15 minutes. 20 minutes for me from South Beach, anywhere I go, it's the same amount of time. This is a game changer in life. It's a life changer. And then, of course, there's just the joy of the ride, which is, of course, a long conversation. The book's about that. There's just the joy it brings in becoming a werewolf and enjoying this experience of flying. It's truly like flying, which we haven't touched on. But the third point is that 39 times riskier motorcycle compared to cars is averaging in all the little shits who are 20 years old.
I was just about to say that exact thing. Tease them out.
Right? This would be like I want to go do cross-country skiing. You live in the extreme north someplace, and someone says, oh, but look at all these ski accidents, and so you shouldn't use your cross-country skis to go out. Like you're lumping in all of us cross-country skiers who are doing it to go to the store and back with downhill crazy 25-year-old dudes who are risking life and limb. These are all piled into the same buckets, and there is no car version of that. Of these. There are, of course, car nuts who do dangerous things, but it ain't at all like that motorcycle world that attracts these young men that do crazy stuff. And so the actual ratio, if you can control for those guys and take them out of it, I don't know, it's probably 4 or 5 times more dangerous. It's still going to be more dangerous, but it's not going to be 39 times.
Yeah, I've probably known between 5 and 8 people have been killed on motorcycles, and all of them shared the same commonality, as you said. They were all 26 and younger. Yep. And I would love for somebody to tease out that data and give the real data, because that's important to me. Can I ask you both one thing about the goddamn noise? And again, I'm going to sound like the oldest curmudgeon you could ever imagine. Is the noise, and is it making your Harley louder than it is in the factory settings? Is that a safety issue, or is that just a cool guy issue? Mark?
Well, it's both. And it's certainly safe. We need to be heard by everybody out there. But as I talked about in the last chapter in Motorcycle Mind, and my previous book was about, it's about why we have emotional expressions, sort of a grain in a fine.
Move it a little bit closer to your face. I'm not just trying to block out your face. Yeah, because I want people to see it. Okay, good.
Yeah,
if it was Bobby, I'd be wanting him to block out her face. Actually, I like that view of you a lot better. Now that we've known you for 45 minutes, we can bust your balls too. Right?
So emotional expressions are key. It's how we're coordinating our interactions right now. In a car, you only have really one dimension of throttle control. You accelerate. You don't even have the ability to pull off the throttle and engine brake. When you pull off the throttle on an automatic, it just sort of disengages. It's not like on a bike or on a manual transmission car. And there's basically no manual transmission cars left. On a motorcycle, not only do you have acceleration and engine braking when you pull off the throttle, which is more like aggression and being conciliatory, but you also have the ability to downshift and upshift. So at a particular speed, I can choose to be in a lower gear. Now I'm more serious. But if I'm on a high gear, I put myself in 5th gear and I'm going 40 miles per hour. It's a little bit high gear to be in, but I'm super casual. If I put on the throttle, I'm barely going to accelerate, and I'm barely going to get any engine braking, but it doesn't matter because things are so relaxed, I don't give a crap. So I have 2 dimensions. I have casual, serious, and I have aggressive and conciliatory. Those turn out to be the 2 dimensions that we have that we're able to do, because being aggressive and serious is being confident. Being a conciliatory and casual is being humble. And respect and disdain are the other corners of that space. Now, it turns out that not only do we do that with our voices and our facial expressions, and dogs do that as well. All social animals do that. And so do motorcycles. You can only do that, though, with manual transmission. When you have manual transmission, by virtue of being able to modulate your seriousness and casualness and make sounds that indicate that to others, and aggression and conciliatory, you have this full two-dimensional space that is not only functional, because they give you all these functional abilities when you're on the bike. So it's functional to be in a lower gear at a particular speed of 60 miles per hour. I might drop down to fourth or even third when the highway suddenly gets filled with cars. Like suddenly it packs up and everybody's still going 60 or 80, but I want to be in a lower gear, and you can hear that I'm more tense, I'm more serious. And now if I accelerate, I get great jerk. Or I decelerate, I get jerk back. I get jerk in the sense of a change of acceleration over time. It allows you to modulate your jerk so that you're more reactive if there needs to be an interaction. Same thing if I'm serious. Suddenly people are speaking like a bar fight. I suddenly get more serious. It means that my body's prepared for quicker action, right? So the full two-dimensional space of emotions, in fact, there's two more dimensions even beyond that, but the key two-dimensional space is something that you have and that you put it into the actual heart of the bike. The bike actually has its innards having the right emotional preparatory state for the moment, and it's signaling that. Or you can choose to signal that. You can also put the clutch in and hide it. And you can disengage the fact and choose not to signal, or I can choose to signal things that's not, I can rev it even though I'm in fifth gear at 20 miles per hour. In fact, I'm not engaged for anything, but I could put the clutch in and fake it as in bluff, right? So you have all of the kinds of abilities to have the expressions channeled from you into the bike, and it feels utterly natural because now it's the emotional expressive modality that matters for the street, right? You have different modalities in different times. You're emotionally signaling on a phone call and different kinds of modalities, but it's the same space than you are if it's just a visual call and so forth. There's all different, so that you are using the emotional expressions that matter for the street, and it happens naturally without anybody. And this is why motorcycles are so interesting when they drive by. It's fun to hear motorcycles because they're signaling, they're saying stuff. It's like just a pack of animals saying all kinds of, and it's not just like in Miami, we also have the Lamborghinis and the flapping kind of engines, and because they're all manual transmission and they're signaling stuff too. Like, look at me, I'm a big old douchebag, right? That's what they're saying.
What they're signaling.
But
Exactly. Yeah.
but they're saying stuff. It's super interesting, and you kind of want to turn and look because there's a fully expressive creature that's going by rather than all these automatics, which are just like, well, they're like lizards. Right?
Bobby, I got one more to slip in, and then you got the last one, okay?
Let me just answer that question real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So he just explained like page 13, 14, 15 of the book, but he starts this section by saying, think about it. Motorcycles are so cool that they can socially get away with trumpeting their own magnificent arrival. Motorcycles are inherently louder than your average car, but even so, we often go out of our way to be even louder than we have to, not just for safety reasons. If we're pulling up to our favorite haunt or heck, even the post office, we're quite likely to give a couple of throttle revs. Hey, I'm here now. Your rides no longer look so cool. Now, that's in the book. And the thing that I like about this is I made a point to not do that because it always annoyed me, especially here in Florida. You're eating outside and, people are doing it and it startles you and you're like, this son of a, and you want to get off and punch him. And then you realize it's a motorcycle guy, so you probably shouldn't. But then I was pulling back. I was backing my turned off motorcycle that was in neutral into a space, and a minivan passenger door swung open and knocked me off the bike. Right. So from that point on, I said, I am revving until I'm parked. And it served two things. Number one, I got to say I'm here. And number two, I got to have a story that explains why I'm not being a douche by doing it.
No. Okay. So the last question for me then, and Bobby, if you have anything else afterwards, is that when you talk about electric bikes, to me, it seems like from our conversation, it has to be internal combustion. We associate the roar of gasoline being burned a lot more, and it's a lot more stimulating. It's a lot cooler than the buzz of an electric bike. Have you ever ridden an electric bike, Mark? Is it anywhere near as cool?
No, it's not. I have driven it and I didn't like it at all. And again, a lot of people say, well, with even automatic cars or electric bikes, now they can accelerate faster and you can shift faster and automatic. It's like, that's not what manual transmission is about. Manual transmission is about giving you a two-dimensional capability, a functional capability of having a higher or lower gear ratio for your moments and being able to just be in a higher gear ratio so that you have greater jerk. to be able to react more quickly. You have this extra dimension of control that's useful, in fact, right? It's not about out accelerating the other things. And also, of course, it's about the emotional expressiveness that comes from it, which is just fun and puts you into the bike, but also is it crucial because roads are social places where you have to signal with other creatures on the road, and that's how you do it safely for us. So electric bikes and the rare automatic motorcycles are completely missing that. They're missing all of that.
Bobby, got anything else?
Yeah, I just got one last one. This may take a little while to answer, so I apologize for this, but anybody who we bored with the motorcycle chat is going to miss a great explanation here. I was listening to you talking to Jordan Peterson. There was something I did not understand. You were explaining about the treads. When you get pruny in the water, your fingers have these water-beating treads that develop, right? The pruniness on your fingers. And you expressed how people sort of in your orbit were saying, no, now you're arguing for design. And I didn't quite understand that. Can you go into that a little bit more? And I may have phrased the question wrong.
Yeah, you would imagine that biologists and psychologists and scientists should embrace Darwin and they believe in natural selection. And they go, yes, I believe in natural selection. And then you say to them, okay, I think that our psychological psychological characteristic of this has an evolutionary reason for why it evolved. They go, oh no, now, or I say, now your fingers have this pruny reaction when they're wet for this particular good reason. They go, oh no, you can't make hypotheses like that. It's like, well, that's the whole point of Darwin, is that, because they'll say, now you're imputing design, and there is no design. There's just a bunch of stuff that happens in the world. It's like, no, the point of Darwin is not that the point of natural selection is not that there's no design. There's design everywhere. You're looking out of eyes that are brilliantly designed as these amazing devices. The point is that there was no designer. It's the blind watchmaker. Somehow you end up with watches despite there not being a designer, which is a fantastically mind-blowing thing. But a lot of the field of biology, and this is partially a leftist thing, because leftism and progressivism wants to have this notion that we're all blank slates, that we're infinitely plastic, unlike the other animals, and that allows them to justify why in our society we can have any kind of society that implements our ingenious schemes, this kind of socialism or communism. And you say, we're not designed for that. Oh, we're not designed for anything. We're just infinitely plastic, so we can raise the next generation to be however we want. That's not what humans are. Humans are not plastic. We have the same kinds of instincts that all animals do. To the extent that we seem plastic to do all of these crazy stuff that we do today, it's because, like I told you about letter shapes, culture has evolved over time to give us artifacts that tap into those fixed instincts that are not plastic. We read because we've tricked our object recognition system into becoming a reading system. We speak and can recognize language because language has culturally evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to sound like objects hitting. Those are plosives. Like when something hits, that's a plosive. And then when objects slide, that didn't make much sound, that's like fricatives. And when either of those things happen, you can tell that was sort of a coffee mug. It wasn't a book that I just hit, right? Now I'm hitting the table that is sitting. Those things ring. Those rings are like vowels and other sonants like A, E, I, O, U. And this is just the beginning of, in Harness. Earlier book, Harness, is about how language and music mimic nature and transform ape to man. The reason we are these amazing humans that we take ourselves to be way beyond animals is not because we're plastic. It's instead that culture is plastic and has kept engineering things to fit our instincts, which are fixed. So I forgot how we got into
No, that's a fantastic answer. But I'm so glad that we took one more shot at the leftists too, because we didn't enough. And my wife and I just got in this big argument when the Pope died too. She's like all about, oh, he was such a kind, compassionate man. I said, yes, no, definitely, and I respect him for that. But he was also a socialist, which means he doesn't understand anything about human psychology. Whatever, doing, you can't speak ill of the dead. No, when you're the Pope, you can speak ill of the dead. I think. Am I not going to go to hell? Am I? But anyway, Mark, do you have any last parting words? Bring it more over to your face, and I'm not just saying to block your face because we can't see it quite well enough. Mark Changizi, Motorcycle Mind. He is a neuroscientist. He's written 6 different books. The one you're seeing on the screen is the latest one. It is fabulous, but also check out The Brain from 25,000 Feet, Harnessed 3.0, The Vision Revolution. But The Motorcycle Mind is the one that almost is convincing me. Again, it doesn't even matter if you convince me to get a motorcycle. Margaret would be like, dude, get rid of that motorcycle right away. Write another book about how to handle your wife who doesn't want you to have a motorcycle. That will be a bestseller too. Anyway, we'd like to thank you guys for joining us. This doesn't work without the support you guys have given us. It's been amazing. All the DMs, the retweets. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Independence Arc Farm. We always talk about how big food companies have monopolized our food supply, and they're poisoning us because they are. Why don't we just start patronizing small independent operators like grass-fed, grass-beef, grass-fed, I was going so good too, grass-fed, grass-finished beef from Independence Arc. Thank you guys so much. I'm Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. That is Mark Changizi. Thank you, Mark.